Hi, I'm Steve Levin, Security Best Practices Lead at Palo Alto Networks. Welcome to the third video in our series about quantum computing and its impact on security. Joining me again are Phil and Richu, two of Palo Alto Networks' quantum technology and cryptography experts. Our first two sessions focused on the security threat from quantum computers and the impact of threats from cryptographically relevant quantum computers. The next sessions focus on quantum cryptography, quantum key distribution, and quantum random number generators. Today's session focuses on planning a transition to a quantum-resistant network, the tools Palo Alto Networks has to help you, and what you can do now to protect your business. So migrating crypto technology from one generation to the next is something we don't do very often. And based on past experiences, it can take many years and even decades. Phil, what should businesses do to prepare for something like this, and how should they get started?
That's a fantastic question, Steve. And so to answer this, I'm going to kind of quickly recap what Rishu talked about in the last video. And this is, how do I become quantum ready? And so if you've already done steps 1 and 2, you've properly assigned the right resources, you've gotten the right budgets in place, and you have the leadership sort of prepared in what you need to do and the people selected and how to carry that out. So we're going to talk about step number 3 here, and that's how to develop an inventory and start prioritizing where you need to take action. And this brings us through the importance of a complete and thorough crypto inventory. And when you start doing this project, really, there's 4 key areas you need to concentrate on. One is identifying all the crypto that's being used today, who and which devices are using that crypto, where is the data flowing, what is the crypto being used to secure this end-to-end and throughout the network. And then obviously, as you're conducting your crypto inventory, you're going to come up with several different categorization types that's going to help you do prioritization. It might be things like risk of the data that you're trying to protect, basically what the shelf life is, and so forth. The most important advice that I can give you while doing the crypto inventory is take your time. Make sure you do it thoroughly. Any accidental omissions or anything that's left out can be a serious security gap that a quantum computer can take advantage of.
Well, now that we have a good understanding of what a crypto inventory looks like, how do you analyze the data that you collected so you can take the next step?
Categorizing data based on longevity of the data itself, sensitivity, and then confidentiality is going to be the key requirement here, Steve. So if your IT teams or application teams need assistance in recognizing such data, getting legal teams' help or their inputs, and even inputs from executive assistance teams, could actually help you identify these high-risk type data. Once you've identified the sensitive data, your next step is to evaluate its current security. That might be taking into account the ciphers, key sizes, etc., and then quantifying the risk should this data be lost or leaked. This is going to then take you to the dollar value that should inform your executive team of the potential loss. So for IT and applications team, a detailed understanding of this is going to be critical. The next step is identifying libraries like OpenSSL or OpenVPN that are underpinning their applications. Also the library version in use and a thorough analysis of what and how are applications using this data at store or data in transit. This should then inform the potential vulnerabilities that the data can be exposed to. Now, let's look at the endpoints, right? So going back to the zero trust architecture we briefly referenced in one of our previous videos, taking into account all corporate devices, be it laptops, handheld devices, bring your own IT and OT devices for your campus, so on, all are potential access points at risk depending on the security associated with them. So clearly, not all of these are endpoint devices. Not all of the endpoint devices would actually be at high risk category, because that would depend on the data these devices or users have access to. So checking your security policies here might be a good place to start. And then close up any loose ends while you're actually working on this. So that would be, I would say, the next best step to actually categorizing your users and assets for high-risk categories.
Right. I mean, to carry on where sort of Rishu left off on the end devices, you also have to understand how the data is moving throughout your entire network between those endpoints. And so you're going to have different routers, different firewalls, switches, and things that are involved. And you have to all understand how security takes place at those, especially with VPNs. Now, the other thing you should be looking at is if your data is now partly in the cloud or it's moving towards the cloud. You know, the last decade we did a lot of lift and shift from our personal data centers into public data centers in the cloud. You should also be taking a look at all of the quantum capabilities that those devices offer you as well. Especially if you're in different public clouds, they're going to have different requirements as well as different solutions for all of that as well. And so the last thing you should be doing is when you're looking at all of this, take a look at where you think you're going to have vulnerabilities and where your data might be harvested. And this is where you should be concentrating on where to start first. Next, I want to talk about understanding your security options. These aren't the security things that you're going to for sure implement, but as you're doing your discovery and your crypto inventory, you're going to be learning a lot of different things. PQCs, which we kind of discussed quite a bit already, are going to be the first thing that you know you're going to have to do. And so the PQCs, the best thing to do is to understand the security, capacity, and the performance trade-offs. Next is crypto agility, understanding what happens and the order of preference in these PQCs you want to implement if something becomes vulnerable. Of course, you're going to have data that you're going to determine is a very high security risk if it's lost. It could be a massive impact to your company or to your customer base if that data is leaked out. And so you're going to have to start thinking about how to go beyond the basics of PQCs. These might include technologies such as QRNGs or quantum key distribution capabilities. And so start investigating those as you're doing your studies here. And obviously, what about things like certification, post-quantum certificates and things like that, Steve, that they have to get involved into as well.
Yeah, and to add to what Phil just said, for migration, I'd say prioritize based on business impact. So going back to quantifying and placing a dollar value on the potential loss to your organization, especially in a harvesting attack situation, think about either on the revenue information side, what is the loss versus loss in technical intellectual property. So this is going to be able to then inform you of your next steps, determining high impact areas to prioritizing migration will need to include your high risk users, your high risk assets, as well as the current security profile that's associated with them. So let's say you have an engineering team who accesses source code every day, uses SSL sessions, and this source code is probably hosted in some data center or a cloud resource. This could be something that you associate as high risk. Another example is your executive team accessing company strategic information using a VPN client to a remote database server. Again, another high risk situation. Now you compare the value of the loss of source code versus the loss of this revenue information or your strategic documents, and then associated with the lifetime value that each of these information, if lost, could actually potentially become a problem. These are some rudimentary examples, of course, but at the end of it, this would help you define and associate the actual loss or dollar value lost for your organization. To conclude, what I want to say is, what is the timeline and where do you start? Is it on the user side or server or both? And how do you remediate? As Phil just gave you plenty of examples of security options and solutions available for quantum readiness. And then evaluating and experimenting one or more of these solutions for your organization needs is going to be your path forward.
Okay, so let's say that you've done risk assessment. You understand the environment that crypto affects in your business, and you understand your security options, and you prioritize your migration. So how do you use your crypto inventory to start the transition?
Yeah, you don't have to do it in the dark. There are many policies that the US government and standard bodies like NIST, NSA, CISA have put together in the past few years that should inform you where and when to start. For European and Asia regions, there are also their respective standard bodies that have been making recommendations that may differ from NIST, but still serves the intent for quantum readiness. So be it recommendations on post-quantum ciphers based on the application for SSL or VPN, or it could be about crypto inventory. So start there. Now, to answer the question on how to start, a lot of good work is being done by the working groups that was put together because of the NSM 10 memo. You have reference architecture that the NCCOE and private sector is working together on that can be a good start to identifying what PQCs to upgrade to and how to start the migration process. Note that NIST is going to announce that once they've standardized the ciphers, they're also going to announce a year from that timeline all of the other ciphers that can be potentially vulnerable to a CRQC. So this detail is going to help inform and create your own internal policies to reflect the life cycle of a classic asymmetric cipher that's in use. And as for symmetric ciphers, of course, starting with increasing the key size should be a good policy to start with internally as your current development cycles are in progress. The foundational fabric of cryptography historically has been somewhat static, and that needs to change as we migrate. With the adoption of crypto agility in your policies and plans, you can stay flexible, you can continue to adopt new ciphers or certificates as they change without it becoming a bottleneck to other operations in your organization.
Right. I mean, to conclude this slide, right, I think one of the most important things to do is to have your technical teams put together a very comprehensive proof of concept lab. This is extremely critical for your team to fully understand what the impact of the PQCs are going to be. And by playing with all of this technology, they're going to be able to identify which PQCs they prefer in terms of security to performance trade-offs, capacity trade-offs, and things like that. You should be proactively thinking about the order of the PQCs you want to implement with specific applications, use cases, and things like that before the worst thing that can happen, right? And that's having one of these new standardized PQCs in the next few months or a year or 2 years down the road become compromised. Then you don't want to have to struggle and scramble to make things happen at that time. You want to be prepared. And so think end to end, as Rishu has mentioned, and I've mentioned, there's a lot of things to do with endpoints and networking and things like that. Fully understand and play with all the different vendors that you have in your production network, bring them into your lab, make sure that they're interoperable and the performance and everything works for you, right? Now, the last thing, of course, is during this lab, you're going to find a lot of different things that may or may not be able to upgrade to PQC. So you're going to identify incompatibilities, and this is where it's going to potentially require more budget and things like that for you to be ready as well.
Richu, does Palo Alto Networks have any tools to help gathering information for a crypto inventory?
That's a fantastic question, Steve. It's always exciting to talk about our innovative and uniquely positioned product offerings. So we at Palo Alto Networks were the first to recognize the potential threat of proliferated use of PQC in SSL. And we released multiple solutions back in March of 2023. We also have additional capabilities that are coming up towards the late 2023. On PAN-OS, we have about 70 plus cryptography specifically related metadata that are captured across traffic logs, decryption logs, and threat logs. This range from recognizing a specific post-quantum cipher in use for key exchange, like the crystal Kybers. I should say MLChem, that's the new name that I just found out. And the negotiated curve details, like X25519 with Kybers 512. Other metadata include certificate type, version, digital signature information. Additionally, you have SSL TLS versions, the ciphers selected at the server level, highlighting any deprecated versions that are still in use. And of course, the logs also bring additional details about endpoint client, if it's using a browser or a desktop client app to initiate these PQC SSL sessions. And of course, the log messages that detect and inform if endpoint client is exclusively only using post-quantum ciphers. So this is extremely useful in two ways, of course. And the first one is it brings an added visibility and a complete traceability of the session between the user and the server for all traffic in your network. And the second detail that it brings about is you can now extract these logs and parse it to build a phase one of your crypto inventory. We've been able to help a number of our customers take advantage of these details with any additional support required from our professional services team to get them started on their crypto inventory journey.
Wow, migrating to a post-quantum state sounds like a huge effort to do properly. Phil, how can companies assess their situation and understand when to get started?
So that's a great question, Steve. And in fact, I get asked that question a lot by our customers when we have conversations around quantum. And so here you see a slide, in what we're recommending to our customers, right? If you take a look at it, and if we truly believe that a cryptographically relevant quantum computer is coming sometime around the end of the decade to maybe early the 2030s or things like that, we have to start working backwards. And so depending on the size of your company and how complex you think your planning and prioritization stage can be, it could take 6 months, 9 months, or up to a year. In some cases, you have to plan for that. And then once you have the identification of where you should start, you should be taking a look at your migration times. Take a look at what you've done in the past. For example, if you've upgraded from DES to AES, from TLS 1.1 to 1.2 to 1.3 and things like that, they can often take multiple years and multiple phases. And so if you add up those first two stages together, and then you have to think about how long you have to keep your most critical data private, and if that duration passes the timeline to when a quantum computer becomes available, then you're a little bit behind the curve, and you should have started taking action now, Steve.
That's really interesting, Phil. What else?
Yeah, so, I sort of hinted on this topic before, but, this is really for your technical team, right? When they're going through the crypto analysis and they're coming up to speed in all the technology, I just want to reiterate that PQCs are going to be something that you're going to have to do. And so we talked about this earlier before about really understanding the trade-offs between each PQC and identifying which order you want to go in. The number two thing is what happens when you hit a vulnerable PQC, when it becomes compromised? How fast can you react? What are the orders of the other backup PQCs are you going to implement? And remember, not all PQCs are created equal, so one use case might require a different PQC as a primary, and then another use case might require yet another different PQC, Steve. And so this is something that you should have ironed out way beforehand, before the incidents happen. Now, this next one all talks about key quality. And so key quality is not created equal. And if you have data that really needs to be protected for an awful long period of time, and you really can't risk it being exposed through some future attack that we don't even know about today. Because when you think about it, right, quantum security is at its infancy right now. There's only 2 known algorithms that can break PKI, but I can assure you, that there's a lot of research being done on, academic agencies, nation states and things like that. They're looking at additional ways and new ways to crack the data protection that we have today. And so if you have to protect against the unknown, then you should be looking at higher key quality, Steve, and how to get there, right? And that might be with the QRNG. So other technologies, of course, that you're going to run into is this quantum key distribution. And I think we have a video later on, Steve, that will talk a lot more about it. But, quantum key distribution is thought of as the ultimate way to prevent a quantum attack. So definitely start doing your homework there. And of course, you're going to be taking a look at certificates, and as Rishu and I mentioned before, this is a little bit lower priority, but during your crypto inventory, you're going to be identifying and taking a look at a lot of those certificates that you're using today. So start prioritizing when you want those to happen. You have a priority list on those as well, Steve.
Okay, well, Phil, as we prepare for the quantum migration, is there anything we can do right now to make our network safer from harvesting attacks?
Yeah, I mean, if I was to take a look at it from a VPN perspective, right, I would say items 1 to 3 on this slide really boils down to a root analysis, right? Don't use weak crypto. And so basically, if you're still, taking a look at your VPN solutions and the configurations that you have in your routers, your firewalls, your VPN concentrators today, you're going to identify all the current state of this configuration when you're doing your crypto inventory. So if you're seeing weak ciphers being used, I would say update them now, right? Try to move to something like a Suite B recommendation where we're using 256 AES and so forth. Definitely start upgrading to higher key qualities like 4K keys, and definitely move away from weak SHA algorithms. Now, number 4 is a little bit on the new side. There's a lot of routers, VPN concentrators, and firewalls starting to support something called RFC 8784. And this is using a post-quantum pre-shared key capability to get you to a post-quantum VPN state. And it doesn't involve upgrading all of your cipher suites. And so this is by far the easiest way to move to a post-quantum capability. So definitely have a look at that technology, talk to your vendors, and see if they're getting into those areas yet.
So now that we understand how to get a start on securing our VPN connections, Ritu, is there something we can do to secure our TLS traffic today?
Yes, we do, Steve. Based on Qualys Labs and other independent reporting, we do know that TLS 1.2 is still the most used version for all services on the internet or even within enterprises. So migrating to TLS 1.3, especially to leverage the PFS only ciphers, perfect forward secrecy, and create an added security with the ephemeral keys is a good step in the right direction. And in fact, most PQCs are going to leverage TLS 1.3. Some may see adoption with Quick, but that's to tell in the future. Now for the server side, given OpenSSL 1.1.1 is officially end of life, might as well upgrade to OpenSSL version 3. And that should help start leveraging the modular code structure for future provider plugins, be it for PQCs or another. SSL sessions within a hardened client to server VPN session is also a solution available today. That could be a good option just to combat challenges of weakened asymmetric ciphers used in SSL. Though not a long-term solution and only preferred in niche use cases, another alternative that I have here is, of course, initiating a post-quantum SSL session with a desktop agent that terminates at a reverse proxy closest to the server. So this kind of guarantees a secured connection end-to-end. Of course, the third one that I would highly recommend is upgrading your certificate key sizes to 4K for the digital signatures. This should help service all of your critical services today, while we are also waiting for implementing standards from the post-quantum certificates. Another good way to secure your authentication-related threats. And the last recommendation, this is a no-brainer, right? So move to larger hash sizes and certainly stop using weaker ciphers or any deprecated hash algorithms that there are.
Steve, I'd like to add one more thing. What Rishu and I just talked about right now, right? These are great recommendations to do sort of protecting what you currently got right now. But will these prevent a quantum attack? And both the things that Rishu and I talked about are not going to prevent a quantum attack. What we're doing here is pushing it down the road. So we're postponing the date of when a quantum attack can succeed against the harvesting attack on your SSL or on your VPN. And so that's what you want to do, is really see if you could stretch the timeline to where the data privacy duration expires before they could break it.
That makes sense.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Phil and Ritu. You covered a lot of critical things to understand about planning your transition to a quantum-resistant network. This session really brings home the need to start sooner rather than later to ensure that you have enough time to design and implement your quantum migration strategy. Because for most companies, this is going to be a multi-phase, multi-year project. You also underlined the importance of conducting a thorough crypto inventory that leaves no security gaps for attackers to leverage. And hand in hand with that is analyzing that inventory, assessing risk, and prioritizing the most important assets to protect first. You also emphasized the importance of proof of concept labs to fully understand your technical options and their impact on your applications and usability. Finally, you showed us what we can do to protect our VPNs and TLS traffic today so that we gain enough time to move to a full post-quantum cryptography suite. So thanks for joining us. I look forward to seeing you again in our fourth video in the series, which addresses questions about post-quantum cryptography and how long it could take to transition to new post-quantum cryptographic algorithms.